everyone. Thanks for joining. So good to see so many familiar faces. Get started in a minute or two. Glad you all are here.
Welcome back from vacation, Judy. I believe you just got back from vacation. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
A nice staycation.
Went to the Fat Farm for a week at Hilton Head Health. If anybody ever needs to get some fitness and health in, it was a great retreat for a week.
Good.
I lost 7 pounds and then I gained 2 of them back the next week with my family and all the kids and all the wine. But it was a good experience. Kick-started my fitness routine again, so that was good.
Great.
Interesting. Very cool.
We're going to have ourselves
I
a
highly
nice
recommend it for any executive level folks just needing a break and needing to get their week away.
I was curious about how it went, Judy, so I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, I'll chat with you about it at some point offline if you want, but the meals were wonderful and the fitness opportunities were great, and yeah.
What do we think? We've got a critical mass, I believe, if it works for Kathleen and everyone. I think we can get started. A few more joining us for video, so thank you. I believe with that, we're going to keep bringing people into the conversation as they join. We just had one more. And I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen. Thank you for, we've had quite the list of topics, and the notion of survival amongst our nonprofits is certainly another heavy one. So thank you to your leadership on this dialogue, and I'll turn it over to you to kick off.
Hey, thanks, Brad. It's just lovely to be with you all again. I find I look so much forward to these connection points, even though they have to be virtual. It's good to be with you all. And again, thanks to our partners at CEONet for just being in this long-term relationship with us. I hope everyone's finding ways to renew your energy this summer. It's nice to hear, Judy, how you renewed yours. Be fun to be able to hear everybody's example of that. It feels like, you know, we're finding some ways to bond as a group of peers. You know, we've taken on, regularly taken on some pretty weighty subjects, as Brad was saying. And, you know, this one's no less heavy. And I just want to thank you again for doing your work in earnest in your communities and thinking really hard and long about how you approach such things as supporting your organizations, about restructuring, possibly mergers, or whatever you call that thing that maybe two organizations come together. You'll hear more about that when we get to our speakers, or potentially even closures if that's what needs to happen. You know, that we know that the health of our nonprofit sector and the health of daily life and communities and many different things right now is pretty fragile. And we all as community foundations have many different ways we can engage in supporting those folks in challenging times. So we're going to take a look at how many of our peers are doing that and see if we can get some translatable ideas, which is always pretty exciting. But we know that there are existential threats out there. The economy is just in a kind of a downfall, and the revenue that nonprofits need to be able to keep up their good work is drying up at the moment, right at the time that communities need them the most. And oftentimes those nonprofits that are helping the organization, those nonprofits that are helping the most vulnerable in our communities are the first to feel the financial pinch, and then they're also the first to potentially decline and fold. So how do we think about who we prop up and how we prop them up in a way that is differentiated, so that we're helping the most vulnerable nonprofits in a way that supports equity. So in fact, we have a slide here about Candid's recent estimates. I don't know if you all saw that piece that Jacob Harold wrote recently. Candid's recent estimates suggest, I think Daniela's going to put a slide up on the screen, that we might lose 22,000 nonprofits because of COVID. Do you have that slide, Daniela?
It got stuck, 1 second.
That's okay. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, there's sort of like a high, a low, and a medium, and Jacob gave me a really good case for how they created these scenarios. There's a chance, I mean, nonprofits fail every year, but there's a case that, 22,000 nonprofits will fail, and it's pretty realistic that as many as 34,000 nonprofits will go out of business due to COVID this year. And so when we think about that, who are those nonprofits going to be in your community? What do they do for your community, and can you do without them? And I don't know what those answers are in your case. You can pull that down, Daniela. I'll just say from a personal perspective, I personally led my organization GEO through a merger in 2002 after the 9/11 recession. And, so I have my own war stories related to a merger. And I was the board chair of an organization in 2009 that went under because of that Great Recession. So I understand the personal costs, how employees are affected, how communities are affected, and so none of this is to be taken lightly. So our hopes for this time together is, to just think through how essential nonprofits are going to be for the long-term recovery, how we can create, how we can make sure that we're maintaining the systems that are going to be necessary for our communities, and explore, the ways in which we can support nonprofits so that they will survive, and those that may not, how to support them through a compassionate closure. So there's a whole range of things, obviously, in the middle there, from mergers to restructuring to refinancing to back office operations and the like. And we have some folks on the line who have some experience with that whole range of possibilities. So I've got 3 of your colleagues on the line. Ala Ronan, who is with the California Community Foundation. She's the program lead for the Funders Collaborative, known as the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative. She will tell you a bit more about that in a minute. Christy Naus with the Community Foundation for Greater Des Moines, and then also George Ferrari from the Community Foundation of Tompkins County in Ithaca, New York. All 3 of these folks are going to share a bit of their personal experience just to kick off the full group conversation. But before we go there, we're just going to get each of you to just share your quick experience through 2 very short polls, okay? So Daniela's going to put the first one up. So am I doing the right one? Yeah, prior to COVID-19, did you have a fund in place to support any of this stuff? Restructuring, consolidations, mergers? No, most of us said no. One of those yeses is me, so that's already skewed in the wrong direction by 1. Okay, we got a second poll for you, which is, are you actively deploying or proposing any kind of, sustainability fund or Building Back Better fund or anything like that post or now that COVID's in action? All right, so it seems like many of us in this room have hopped into action and are at this point starting this work. So this sounds like it is the right peer conversation for you to be in, and there's probably some good peer sharing and peer learning to be done on this call. Terrific. Well, so I'm seeing some good questions coming up in the Zoom chat, and we'll get to those in a minute. Let me invite the folks who are going to share with us into the conversation. We'll start there, and then we'll move forward into answering some of your questions. So Ala, let me just start with you with a pretty open-ended question. Why don't you share just some of the basic parameters of the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative? I know it's been in motion for more than a decade, so I'm sure you have learned a lot So why don't you just give me the basics of the program and then how it has changed in light of the, the way the world has changed over the course of the past 3 or 4 months.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here. So the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative, the NSI for LA, started actually out of the 2008 recession. So another sort of lesson learned out of historic recessions that I think we will take lessons from then and continue with them into our goals and approach now. But generally, the NSI fosters long-term partnerships for nonprofits who are interested in exploring strategic restructuring. So we will work with them just in that exploration process, even if ultimately they decide not to merge or partner. And going through that exploratory process has proven extremely important, as it's a time for reflection on both to better understand how it is they're working, what impact they are making, and how they might be able to leverage and expand that impact by including other partners in the work that they do. We are a funders collaborative of over 18 foundations, and we are managed by 5 managing funder groups, of which I am one of them. And so over the past 10 years, we've worked with 242 nonprofits with 84 negotiation grants, 37 integration grants, but more than a few dozen partnerships that were built out of that. In terms of what encompasses strategic restructuring, those can be alliances of networks, shared services or arrangements, including back of house work, and then integrated organizing, and ultimately a merger. So I'll just stop there because I know that we'll get into more details with follow-up questions.
That's really helpful. So have you in the past supported wind down? I mean, I jokingly said, when we were doing our little prep 10 minutes before about, that we need a kind of a hospice care for nonprofits, death with dignity. Is that something that the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative has been asked to do in the past or has done?
The wind down isn't a formal part of our process. In the past few years, there have been some what I'll even call anchor nonprofits in LA that have had to close their doors suddenly, and that is definitely something that us as funders and our funder peers have gotten very closely involved with, including even grants to help cover payroll for non-executives and helping with the contracts of moving different programs and services to other nonprofits in the area that do similar work to try and ease that break in service to the constituencies that nonprofit has served. But it's not a formal part of the NSI. I think ultimately our goal is to have enough trust between ourselves and the nonprofits to where we can start with those open exploratory conversations before it necessarily gets to the point, and or perhaps have those conversations that then lead to the point of deciding to maybe close doors and go through the process of shifting those services and clients to other nonprofits.
Gotcha. And so are you already able to vision out a little bit about how the NSI might be supporting where the nonprofit sector is going, or what the needs might be for survival or for shifting based on COVID and everything else?
So the Center for Nonprofit Management here, of which I'm a board member as well, they did a nonprofit snapshot, and already 20% of the nonprofits that responded to their survey are considering closing their doors. So 20% is obviously a significant number. And so we're looking at that to better, to see where we can play a role in helping to either create those partnerships or help with those mergers. And we've had very serious discussions about, is it part of our role to make those connections for them? Is it part of our role to make those suggestions? And ultimately we've decided that it isn't. That's something that needs to happen organically amongst the different nonprofits, because it's almost like a marriage, right? You can't just sort of push people together and expect that sort of chemistry or that sort of cohesion or symmetry. And so, but it's definitely something we're tracking. We have been talking for the past year or so about piloting an executive transition program, and that we're looking to fast track right now, because we have so many executives that are considering right now, leaving their positions because they're overburdened and overwhelmed, and burnout is a real thing, and so looking at how we can do that in a way that is with dignity, like you said.
When you say executive transitions, you mean, well, yeah, tell me what you mean by that.
Where the leader, the CEO or the ED of a nonprofit is looking to leave that position. And so does that mean, how can we support them in their succession planning and their transitioning process?
Gotcha.
And help the nonprofit then search for someone else.
Or maybe get an interim or get someone else in. Gotcha, that makes a ton of sense. 20%, goodness gracious. That is tough to think about for LA County. Has your collaborative set of funders had a conversation about how equity plays into this, or inequity, meaning, are there entire swaths of the city or neighborhoods who would be losing, the entire, service provision, or, would certain racial groups or ethnic groups be harder hit, and how would that play into who gets support?
So I don't know if it would play into who gets support. I don't think we've gotten to the point yet where we are so overwhelmed by applicants that we have to decide, just based on shortage of funds necessarily. But in looking at who we engage over this pilot process of the executive transition, we have been trying to look at it with an equity lens to better understand who should and could be part of that initial cohort. In terms of supporting nonprofits with an equity lens in general, CCF does have a COVID-19 response fund, and we have done some serious sort of data-driven projects into understanding where those areas of need are and who have been the most hard hit financially through COVID. And so the grants we've been making through the response fund have been very targeted in areas like South Los Angeles, Southeast Los Angeles, the Antelope Valley, San Gabriel Valley. So I wouldn't say necessarily through NSI, even though we have it.
It wasn't a good question for you. What I was going through my head was, how they say too big to fail? I was thinking like too central to fail, but that isn't a question necessarily for the NSI, but it was something you might get to through your work, so it was sort of a.
No, yeah, I see where you're going. It's a very tricky thing, because no nonprofit wants to go to their funder and say I'm failing, because that risks then not getting funded, and it's sort of a catch-22 process, right? So I think one of the most successful things that we've done as a group with NSI is we've brought a consultant on to do those initial conversations with the nonprofit. So the nonprofit isn't coming necessarily to CCF or Hilton or Parsons and saying, I'm struggling, I need help, and ultimately feeling like they might be jeopardizing their relationship or future funding with that partner. They're going to our consultant, who actually used to be a managing funder of NSI and has transitioned, where they have these confidential conversations. And I think what's been so great about her then is she can come and she's been able to provide us sort of data around where these nonprofits might be or who they might be serving, without necessarily revealing it's X nonprofit that
Yeah.
is struggling. And so that ability to look at it without any sort of prejudgment or pre-relationship in your head has been really helpful.
That is great. Thank you, Ella. That's terrific. Well, I'm going to turn to George Ferrari now. George, when we talked a little bit on the front end, you shared your unique way of talking about this that might make the whole discussion of two organizations coming together a little bit more palatable. So why don't you share with the rest of the folks how you think this through?
Maybe less specifics and more conceptual. I mean,
Yeah.
we have always kind of embedded within the work of our community foundation the concept that we do 4 functions with 3 kinds of resources. We acquire, we steward, we analyze, we distribute. So we take in, we take good care of, we learn from, and we circulate. Certainly financial resources are part of that, but equally as importantly are informational resources about needs in the community, best practices, and even almost more importantly are the social capital resources. So we view our responsibility as building an endowment for our community that includes social capital, the connections across differences of race, class, gender, geography, our ability to trust our governmental and public sector institutions, and our ability to work together effectively. So we never use the term merger, but we talk about mission preservation. And we talk about restructuring after an epidemic, after a problem like the pandemic or a recession, of making things better than they were to achieve greater levels of equity. And when you talk about that and you don't use the word merger, you really help address some of the difficulties that individual staff or oftentimes board members have with doing this kind of a work. And we also position ourselves as a philanthropic consulting agency so that we're doing that both with donors. We have a lot of donor advised funds, as well as what we call mission-driven organizations, describing those players in the not-for-profit sector that are focusing on that mission preservation. So if we have those relationships and those conversations during easier times, it makes it possible to build on the trusting relationships we have during challenging times. And people will come to us and say, I have an idea, I have a concern, I want to do this. Can you point me in the right direction with whom else we should be having conversations? So it really is about building and taking care of that social capital from which springs the kind of work of when there is stressors and pressures and challenges in the environment, being seen as a sort of nonpartisan, informed place that people can have those conversations and come and say, hey, we're in trouble, or we're not meeting this need in this community, or we'd like to work in partnership with XYZ organizations. They're not responding to us. Can you broker a conversation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, you didn't say kind of honest broker necessarily, but, you know, if you're putting the mission at the middle, it's sort of like you're putting community needs and best interests or frankly, the greater good at the middle, rather than any particular form that it comes in, like any individual organization.
Right. I mean, the social worker, community organizer question is, who is the client here? Whom are you serving? Is it donors? Is it not-for-profit organizations? Or is it people in need in your community? And that's why we talk a lot with including people with lived experience, or what we call context experts in every decision making we have, whether it be at the board level, the grant review level, the community catalyzing meeting activities we do. We try to find ways in which we can build on-ramps where people that don't have the classic content book learning expertise, and there's plenty of those in a college town like Ithaca, New York, way too many of those in a college town like Ithaca, New York. And we try to build the connections with people with those lived experiences. We have a field of interest fund that's a community planning field of interest fund. And that was given to us by the bequest gift, over $1 million, that allows us to use those resources to build things like democratizing the way the city develops its budget, or how do you organize neighborhoods where there might be a grandma on the block that is the real leader but isn't seen as the real leader, and how do we build those relationships in ways that address when an organization is not serving that community. How do you build that social capital within that community separate from the vast not-for-profit industrial complex that may or may not be working particularly well?
That's great, George. Thank you for that context. I love it. Well, I'm going to get Christy into the conversation now, because I also want to get the rest of you into the conversation. And I just want to say again, if you don't mind putting your video camera on, it makes it easier for me to call on you, and it puts you on page 1 of my screen, so that means that you are more visible to me too. So Christy Naus, again, from the Great Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines, and she's also one of the on the board of CEONet. So thank you, Christy, for being here. And Christy, I understand that you're, doing a little funding for mergers and alignments right now, and I think you just constituted maybe a little special program around that. I don't know if it's new or if it's reconstituted. So maybe just tell me a little bit about that and what you're learning and how it's ramping up or different based on COVID-19 and what you're seeing in your community.
Yeah, I will. It actually goes back to really 2008 and 2009 was sort of when we began to dabble in that conversation about the strategic alignment is kind of a softer word for the merger or the conversation about shared services. And so we did at that time offer special grant programs that were just about funding for a consultant to come in and help boards come together and talk about the possibilities. We even would provide funding for legal expenses related to coming together as two organizations into one shared service agreement, et cetera. And that worked really well in our community at the time. And so certainly as COVID hit, and we just got a study back last week, 87% of the 1,300 nonprofits surveyed have extremely negative financial impacts related to COVID. And in our case, about 25% don't know about the future related to whether or not they're going to stay open or not. And I will say my experience this time around, our nonprofit organizations are much more open and approaching us with the conversation, even to ask us about who do you know that we might align with. Our board is ready to talk about it, or we know that's the reality for us, and really looking to the community foundation potentially even to broker some of those conversations with organizations we know want to have the conversation but might not know about each other. And so, yeah, we did, our board did some special nonprofit adaptation grants. We did 3 rounds of that related to just COVID related unplanned for expenses or shifts in programming, but then also allocated, rather than our leadership grants that are funding the big, capital, wonderful tidal wave projects in the community, we shifted that funding this year into these strategic collaboration grants. And are just, we have sort of cycles in it, but if we go through all the funding in the first effort, that's going to be it. We're going to fund to the right projects, the right collaborations. And it really is about encouraging that strategic alignment, coming together as organizations in the sector to look at shared programming, or even now as we're facing these issues with our schools and whether or not they're going to reopen, and the issues with childcare or out of school programming, how might those serving organizations come together, and how would our funding help in the conversations about how they ramp up and help us deal with this issue for our community. So it's something we've been doing for a long time. And I think too, you all have talked about the trusting relationships. That's a part of our strategic plan, is to develop trusting, authentic relationships with the nonprofit sector. And that has served us well then when you come into times like this. They're not afraid to have that conversation. They know that we're a safe space. I've even had a nonprofit leader of a very large organization call me on a Friday night crying and needing money for a strategic bankruptcy attorney for the organization. And we're funding that right now for them. They're not afraid to ask for that because we've been developing the relationships over the years. So you can go to our website to learn more about the strategic collaboration grants, but we're very excited to offer it. And we immediately then had a funder for the arts organization step in and provide even more funding to the pool so that we'd have more available.
No, I'm just loving the different tone in this conversation than I have heard in decades past. You hear funders sometimes say, there are too many nonprofits, and like it's our decision, that this one needs to go together with this one, and like we're gonna, I don't know, do these forced marriages like Allah said, and that's just not how that works. It doesn't work that way. It just absolutely doesn't. And who are we to decide, I guess, is the other point. And so when you spend all of that time building the trusting relationships, then you're there and they're willing to ask. So that's just great. I'm just so glad to hear that that's how it's playing out for all of you. So I'm sure that there's some pent-up demand for either questions or insertion of comments from the folks who have been sitting here listening. So I'll pause there, and then I've got some more questions. and thoughts to insert if folks are not popping up and saying things themselves. So I'm going to pause here and let the rest of us in the room pop up with things that they're doing, questions that they have, ideas on your minds. Rachel. And
Hi,
then Dan.
everyone. I'm Rachel Kasilevich with the Los Alamos Community Foundation in northern New Mexico. A big part of what we're doing now is looking at our nonprofit training program that we offer each year, but trying to figure out how we can really adjust that to meet the needs of our nonprofits right now, because they are so varied and different. And so I'd just be curious to hear from anyone who maybe, if your foundation does do anything with nonprofit training, you know, either whether it's capacity building training that's formally organized or facilitating conversations, if you have a model that you've landed on for the year ahead, because we've been surveying nonprofits, we've gotten answers. There's such a variety of needs that we're really struggling with how to offer either one track or multiple tracks of training options that are going to help nonprofits get over the hump. So.
And when are you talking specifically about this question, like financial sustainability or considering collaborations or mergers, or are you just saying in general, they're stressed out, how do we offer them training?
That as an element of it, you know, all those items that you mentioned first, but for those nonprofits that still are, you know, strong or solid, but need to retool and figure out how they're going to get through their pivot moment, you know, what does that look like for them? And is it as simple as offering a workshop on marketing, a workshop on fundraising, a workshop on board development, you know, or is it more sustained and kind of longer term trainings that are popping up?
Anyone have advice for Rachel?
Rachel, one thing that we heard early on was just nonprofits were seeking a table to be with each other and to be heard. And so we've just really, we got a few funders together to help develop these, we're calling them community conversation circles. And we're doing it once a week at this point. We get over 100 people, which is good for our community when it comes to a time to be together. And we've just offered different topics, whether it's an attorney, helping them understand the CARES Act. And then we actually had office hours with the attorney so they could one-on-one have conversations. But right now we just are starting a new focus on, long-term strategic planning and sustainability. So coming together, it's new strategizing through a long-term crisis, and it's a 3-part series. So that's what we're offering. Or so rather than our trainings that we typically were doing, we've sort of pivoted and turned it into this nonprofit time. And many times we'll even bring in nonprofits who are doing something in a particular area, whether it's financial forecasting or, you know, whatever the topic is for that week, and we'll have them present sort of like we're doing now, and then break out into the breakout spaces and come back together. So happy to tell you more about that. But in our community, that's been really, really well received by the nonprofit sector.
Sounds lovely.
Thank you.
I saw Dan leaning in, and then Nancy.
Yep, thank you. I'm going to sneak in 2 questions. The Candid report, it just makes me curious about looking at the scenarios there of nonprofit closures, social profit sector impact, how that might compare to like small business for-profit anticipated closure. And not to necessarily draw an artificial comparison, but even just thinking about the value of the nonprofit sector, ironically demonstrated by comparison to other closures that most people think about and can kind of weigh in on. So
Dan, are you making the point that nonprofits are closing at a slower rate? Because I think that's true. And particularly nonprofits that are funded by foundations are healthier. Does everyone know that? So both CEP did some research, and then so Candid is based on 990s, and then CEP has like a nonprofit panel where they surveyed their nonprofit panel, and those whose revenue models are built on earned revenue are suffering worse than those whose revenue models are built on raised revenue from foundations. and they are failing at a slower rate than for-profit small businesses.
Okay, yeah. I think just thinking about how to frame the data there in that comparison around showing the value of the social profit sector, and you know that whether it's by strength that they may fail less, or you know, just drawing those comparisons may help elevate the field. A second quick question for Christy and George. I'm curious about you know, seeing your role of philanthropic consulting agency funding strategic collaboration grants. To what extent do you insource or outsource that advice or those activities, or how, you know, the services you provide to the nonprofits themselves?
We provide the funding, but then they use a outside, you know, consultant or someone to do that work. We keep a directory of nonprofit consultants on, and they identify what their area of expertise is. It's on our website, and so we'll make connections, but we don't do the consulting ourselves.
And for us, when we talk about philanthropic consulting, the majority of that is with donors and donor advisors. And we find that they often start as a donor advisor with us. They might transform their fund into a field of interest fund or agency fund or a future disposition for unrestricted. So we do a lot of that ourselves, and in concert and in support with their own professional advisors, individual donors, professional advisors.
Gotcha. Thanks.
So Nancy Brown, I think you had your hand up.
I was actually going to answer the question about what we were doing as a community foundation and supporting the nonprofits. Is that
Great.
still?
Please, yes. Sorry, okay. I missed you before.
No, that's it. So when I first came here, there was already some work being done in the nonprofit community where the executive directors in this community started to meet with each other more out of a desire to maximize expertise, in that if you have an HR issue and you're a small shop, how does that work if you don't have HR expertise? So they were trying to collaborate together, but eventually we were successful in securing a grant from Otto Bremer Trust that was allowing us to put a stronger framework around it. And we just launched the Winona Nonprofit Alliance, and it is a model where we're the facilitator for it. So we are the host, and to make sure that it keeps perpetuating itself, but it is a board directed organization. And we meet on a bi-monthly basis where there is an hour of sharing and offers, and followed by programming. And for example, our most recent programming was about getting the best bang for your buck in marketing and communications, and how to work with media and things like that. And so it's not just ED focused, it might be expertise that's needed within the organizations as a whole. And so we're really excited to see where it's going. And I envision it being a great resource for our donors in our community. And I have to give a shout out to Christy at the Des Moines Community Foundation, because they have this fabulous website, Give DSM or DSM Gives, or I don't know.
GiveDSM.org, yes.
.org. And so we copied and stole it, and we have something very similar. So it drives a donor that wants to support our community to one place where all of the Nonprofit Alliance members reside.
That's terrific. Anyone else want to bring a question in that they have? George.
If I might, it changes the subject slightly, but I think it's important for us to think about, given the times we're in and how it appears people's hearts and minds and momentum are a little more open, I'm wondering how we are centering racial justice and dismantling white supremacy in our own work, but also in the work of supporting the restructuring of not-for-profits in the expectation that they'll prioritize this in a way they may not have in the past, and they'll serve communities better. I have no answers other than I think it's an important question for us to be pondering.
We had Susan Taylor Batten on the last one, and we do intend a follow-up where I think we can learn together on how to do that well. But it's a really great question when we think about the overlay of this topic, right? How do we center, and that's sort of the question I was trying to ask Ella, you know, in how we think about, you know, the community organizations in this moment, and how we prop up certain ones in a different way. But what other thoughts do others have on this subject?
If I could add, I just in a soft way, you know, looking at diversity, equity, inclusion practices for us, and thinking about what we can first control ourselves and how we can influence that in a positive way, not in a punitive way, in the grant making process by, you know, even really starting to measure and encourage better representation of ethnic diversity on the boards of the nonprofits that we support. But I think, ironically, you know, in light of a lot of nonprofits struggling, and, you know, we had a local museum that was already made the decision to shut their doors even before COVID. So we've seen some of those ebbs and flows, but there's been a lot more momentum and energy behind some of the Black and brown-led nonprofits in our community really rising up and having an opportunity, despite being pretty fledgling and not having a lot of resources, that now is their moment. And I think those are organizations we're really paying attention to and want to be able to help resource if we can.
Mm-hmm. Judy. If you're talking, you're on mute, my friend.
Wes?
Now, okay, you came off mute, then you went back on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're off. You're good.
Okay, my West Virginia has the distinction of being one of the least diverse, unfortunately, places in the nation. So I think this is really pertinent in places like West Virginia, where you don't have everything right in your face on a daily basis. And so what our board has agreed to do is we've just modified all of our grant making applications to include a question as something that our grants committee can reflect on as they look at the applicant's role, and that is, what is your organization doing to build a just and inclusive community?
Sounds like a good start.
Just to encourage them to be considering that as they're doing it. It's a first step.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pervasive to all of our application processes.
Mm-hmm. What about, I mean, you know, hearing that 20% number in LA County and, you know, what Christy was mentioning, I mean, what about the inevitable closures of key institutions and Georgia's point about mission preservation? I mean, I think that a lot of what happens is the closures of nonprofits that are more like an abandonment of a car on the side of the road rather than a careful and deliberate and compassionate closure where the people are cared for, the mission is cared for. There's some preservation of history and of the progress that has been made. So I'm just wondering, you know, do any of you have supports that you already know of in your community, or that your community foundation has been involved with, that could guide our way on that? This might just
I'm sorry, just to make it even a little more challenging and difficult, right? We're also going to be dealing with retrenchment of local government at every level, city, county, and state, in terms of budget cutbacks. So things that used to be done locally that we lose, that we might want to look to for the mission-driven sector to fill in, they're not going to be able to do that either. So we have a double whammy going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I think part of what can work is having a developed and trusting kind of funders network too, so that if you know of a particular nonprofit organization that you need to come around to help have a soft landing. How can you and the right funders come around that to identify the organizations that can come in and help make sure those client needs are still being served if it's that kind of organization, right? And provide the funding to make that happen, whether it's on cycle, off cycle, or just having some flexible funding available that you as a community know you're willing to get out there to embrace this organization, and more importantly, those being served through its mission to help have a plan and an exit strategy. And so I think some of that can come through compassionate funders.
Yeah. And I just keep thinking about, like, how many of you are capacity building, are capacity building funders? I'm guessing some of you are, or is there a consulting resource? When I helped shut down, sadly, an organization who was getting funding from Otto Bremer, it was you, Nancy, I guess. It was a Minneapolis-based organization. If there was a person who was actually skilled in what needs to happen for a compassionate wind down, like a deployable resource, someone who understands, because most people haven't done this before, they don't know what to do, and it's a big flailing exercise. So I don't know if that's something that could be supportive or helpful to the organizations as they're starting to think that through. And they're doing it while they're mourning, while they're mourning the loss of their job and their colleagues and whatever else. Being the last one out of the door is not a fun enterprise to be part of. Well, anyway, that's something that I just see coming down the pike, and it feels like we need to be prepared somehow.
Kathleen, I was just going to mention, Atlanta wasn't able to be with us today, but I do believe they have a pretty strong consulting relationship that is specific to that work. So I flagged their resources because it was something that Lita mentioned, I think, to your point about how to unwind these, how to help people transition when staff are involved. So I flagged that in the conversation. And just in my own experience of when we went through a merger of two community foundations, I think the emotional toll that it took on the current staffs and how their roles were going to change and how there was uncertainty, even though we were trying to create, a level of certainty and comfort with the change. You're absolutely right to be taking into consideration the personal toll that it takes on people when it's just their livelihoods. So I just wanted to reflect on that, and thanks for calling that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead.
Salah.
Hi.
I just wanted to also say that as a funder, we oftentimes have a really privileged vantage point of being able to maybe see, as different nonprofits come and speak to us, that they might all be experiencing a similar problem that maybe they don't know that is common across, because they don't want to share their problems too broadly or too widely. And one of the things we did through our sustainability initiative is we brought on Nonprofit Finance Fund to do financial teaching, financial learnings for cohorts of groups that are all in the similar fields. So, nonprofits that do affordable housing and homelessness work or education work. And one of the things we found that a lot of the cash flow problems that the nonprofits doing homelessness work were having was because the local homelessness authority, LAHSA, was not paying them. They had a 3-month back delay.
And that's only going to get worse due to what George said, and that's what happened in the last recession.
Right. But one nonprofit going to LAHSA and saying, this isn't working for us, isn't going to make much of a difference. But then as a funder, seeing that this is something that's affecting a cohort of nonprofits that we work with, we can then use that sort of clout that we have to go and say, this isn't working for our nonprofits. And we have a cohort, and so we can show that this is a pattern, and then we were able to get that delay changed. So I think it's about looking at what sort of resources and positions we sit in and how we can maybe best influence the environment that the nonprofits are struggling within, as well as supporting the capacity of the nonprofits themselves.
That is a terrific point and something to get out in front of as local governments and are going to start slower paying, even slower paying than they probably are right now as the money starts to dry up. There's a good question in here from Judy. I wasn't sure if, I saw a couple of people come off mute, but I wasn't sure if that was incidental or if they wanted to say something. Okay, maybe incidental. So I was going to go to Judy's questions about community foundation mergers. I think the topic of next, yeah, Gary, it was you who came off mute before. Did you want to say something, or did you just come off mute incidentally? You came off mute, then you went off of video, so I wasn't sure. You're hiding.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, listening to this, I'm just listening from our perspective. We're in Colorado Springs, El Paso County, and we did a survey of our local nonprofits because we didn't have any good data. We used to have sort of a nonprofit trade organization that was a membership organization that we could turn to. So we didn't have, they merged with an entity up in Denver, and they're now a statewide focused mainly on training and education for nonprofits. But we found that the feedback we got were that we had about 250 respondents, and most, I think 75% indicated they had 3 to 6 months of reserves. There was not this sense of imminent collapse, which I was fully expecting. I believe 60 to 70% received PPP, and so we're sensing that perhaps that plus the number who have reserves, they're feeling like there's not an imminency about their future. But as all of these federal benefits start wrapping up at the end of this month, we are sensing that we just had a conversation with a number of funders yesterday, sort of a tsunami approaching. And obviously you don't want to wait till 3 to 6 months and burn through your reserves and then address the issue. So we've been talking to Nonprofit Finance Fund, La Piana. We've talked about loan programs or lines of credit programs. We just haven't put a stake in the ground just yet, but there's a desire to help, but we're still collecting information. So hearing from all these others sort of gives me a sense of perhaps, we might be a month or two behind, and I certainly have appreciated this conversation.
Well, thank you for that. I'm glad that it's enhancing your thinking. I don't know if you're anything behind or ahead, or everything's different all over the country, and maybe your nonprofits were just more financially frugal. Who knows? But I do think that 2021 is going to be where the truth really lies, because I think that a lot of the financing for 2020 might have already been in the bank for folks, and 2021 is going to be the real proof point. So I saw Heather just came on video. Did you want to say something, or are you just saying hi?
No, I'm here. I posted a question, so I'm glad that we got in the comments to the point of talking about some of our own challenges.
Yeah.
And so I mean, here in our region, and I'm seeing across the country, there's a lot of similar conversation about as our work and the work of our local United Ways has less and less clear boundaries. I've started to think about what that would look like if at some point down the road we had our own strategic alignment. But I can see where there are some challenges with that, especially due to the United Way's national structure and brand and all of that. So I've been looking for, just Googling, trying to find resources or information about where that's happening. And I wondered if any of you had good resources about, you know, that address when it's happened, when it's working, when it's not, that sort of thing.
We definitely know of a lot of circumstances where the COVID fund has been whatever you want to call it,
and ours
housed.
It's been that work that has heightened this in my awareness of a possibility to be thinking about.
And I have a relationship with, you know, Brian Gallagher, you know, at United Way Worldwide, but I don't, we could look into where those other places are. Brad has some ideas, it looks like.
Yeah, I'll put them into the chat. Fort Dodge in Iowa and Daytona Beach down in Florida. And then Dan somewhere in here. I was thinking there's one in Indiana. Maybe it's not for some reason I was thinking DeKalb County in Indiana, but there's so I'll track them down for you and flag them, because they would be worth having a conversation of what their formal structure is, because each one has a unique structure in terms of how their business model is organized in support of you know, who's the lead entity, where do they share, where do they go separate, you know, those kind of things. So I'll flag some of the individuals that you'll want to take note of, and they all will be more than happy to chat with you. And IU School of Philanthropy also has been tracking this very closely, and I can get you to her name's escaping me at the moment, but I'll track her down too, so that you can chat with her. She knows the landscape even better than I do.
Great.
But as I was starting to say, I think, Brad, am I right that the next conversation is about the financial, you know, difficulties of you all yourselves? I mean, I know that your business models run really thin on a razor thin margin anyway, especially those of you for whom donor advised funds are a major source of your financial support. Yeah, this is a tough time for you too. So that's what the next month's conversation is about. And so this whole idea of your own potential consolidations or mergers or other sort of, you know, how do you break open your own business model in a different way for a broader sustainability, given the current moment? That's going to be that good question. I'm not trying to forestall you talking about it a little bit here right now too, but that's just going to be the full conversation there. And I saw Georgina come off mute. I didn't want to cut you off. If you wanted to say something.
Sure. I think Brad already said it, though, that Iowa has been on the forefront of United Way and Community Foundation collaboration. I think ranging from just sharing back office type things and administrative functions, such as receptionists and accountants and software, all the way up to, you know, involving strategic, well, definitely, sorry, all the way up until the top level, not even separating out some of the CEO roles. So it seemed to have been a push in Iowa a while ago, and so it would be interesting to find out how that's going. We did collaborate with our local United Way for COVID-19 response, and it was immensely rewarding, and I think really helpful for the nonprofits to know that we were both on the same page, and that we were both listening, both organizations were listening, and that we were working together, and we weren't kind of playing hide the funding from any, that it was all just out there, and we were doing the most to help that we could. And we had partnered with them before on things like conferences and trainings, but this took it to another level. But definitely look for examples in Iowa.
This is a beautiful moment for breaking through some old, you know, sticking points and coming out the other side with, you know, maybe a beautiful new landscape for how we support our communities. And this might be one of those things. Well, time flies when you're having fun. I don't want to keep you past the hour that we said that we would be together. So I just want to say a very quick thank you to George and Christy and Ella. Thank you for your wisdom and for joining us, and to all of the rest of you for just this continued commitment to learning and growing and figuring out these complex questions together. As I mentioned, the next CEO Roundtable, I didn't say the date, but it's August 18th, and registration's already open. So come on and join together for the conversation. Thanks again for being with us today, and, you know, we are always at your disposal, not only in the form of Brad, but in the form of everybody at council. So stay healthy, stay sane if you can, and hopefully we'll all stay connected. Take good care.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.